Welcome to the Sunday Times Politics Weekly, where we explore the big political stories of the moment. I'm Mike Siluma, and thanks for joining us. Previously on the Politics Weekly, we discussed the dilemma faced by our government following the ICC's issuing of an arrest warrant for the Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is due to attend the Brics summit here later in the year. Since then, the problem seems to have become more acute. Government is still scrambling for a solution as the clock ticks by. This week, the issue had boiled down to whether South Africa should leave the ICC, which is the International Criminal Court, or not. The broader question is whether our foreign policy has completely lost its way. That's the question with my guests we'll try to answer this time on the Politics Weekly. Our guests are Professor Sphamandla Zondi, who teaches politics and international relations at the University of Johannesburg, as well as Amanda Khoza, who is the Sunday Times presidential correspondent.
You asked Mr. Ramaphosa to sit down first. I'm standing.
Now I warn you. I need to put on my big girl panties and keep going.
You can't have two speakers standing at the same time.
Security services of the Republic of South Africa, you may intervene.
There's been several attempts on my life.
Lower that hand on
The president is accused of serious crimes. He can't be addressed by a person like this. This is an order of the House.
In order to pursue the greater good, you have to enable some people to eat a little bit.
Corrupt people do not eat alone. They have a spider web.
I now suspend the proceedings. I have warned you.
Let's start with you, Amanda, because you have been following and covering for us the story of the last week. The ANC had, on top of the ongoing controversy about what to do with the ICC warrant and whether we should let President Putin come here or not, or arrest him or not. Last week there was an NEC where the issue was discussed, but it did not. One would have expected it to go smoothly with a clear line coming out of the NEC and by extension out of the government. But what do you think happened? Because there seems to be a lot of confusion.
Hi, Mike. You are absolutely correct. From what we saw play out on television and the news last week is that everything was fine. You know, the ANC called us to a post-NEC briefing where they're going to tell us what they discussed with the ANC leaders. And we know that the ICC was on the agenda. And so when the ANC's Secretary General Fikile Mbalula briefs the nation saying that South Africa has withdrawn from the ICC, I think everybody was just like gobsmacked. And so I'm not quite sure what the journalists were asking, but I know that the Namibian president was in the country and he was in the NEC. And so I think part of the response was about SWAPO and, you know, Namibia and this whole ICC thing. We know that when the Namibian president was in the country, he had very harsh words to say about how the ICC pressures African countries. And so at the same time, or just a few hours apart, if not an hour apart, at the Union Building, the president is hosting the Finnish president, and he's asked about this to say, Mr. President, we see or we hear on the news that the ANC over the weekend resolved that we should withdraw from the ICC. And again, the president decides to trust his SG and he confirms the news saying, no, we've decided to withdraw from the ICC. And so the nation is just like, oh, okay. But not long after that, on the same day, they decide that they're going to withdraw this, and it's not the case. South Africa remains a signatory to the court. What we've decided is that we're going to amend the Rome Statute. We are going to try and push for a more fair process in implementing the law. The nation misheard us, basically. And so to answer your question, I would say I'm not sure where the lines were blurred, because the president sat in that NEC meeting, and so he made a decision to trust what Fikile Mbalula said. He could have easily said, I wasn't at the briefing. If that's what the SG said, all I can say is that we discussed the matter, and this is what we discussed about the matter. He didn't have to confirm if it wasn't the truth. That's all I can say about it. I'm not sure where the lines were crossed or where the miscommunication came in, but the president had a choice to tell the truth or take the country into the NEC meeting and say, yes, the matter was discussed, but this is what we discussed. Or he could have said, please go back to the ANC SG. You are diverting us from the state visit about, Finland.
Okay, while we on the party side, we will go to the government side shortly. Professor Zondi, how can it happen that a party that has been dealing with this issue for a while, or that should have been seized with the issue for a while, does not seem to have a party line?
You would have thought that the ANC would have had a clear position given the Al-Bashir scenario that played out earlier. It was a classic case in having a precedent to use in order to decide better and stronger and clearer for the future. But it created the communication or miscommunication that happened both by the president and the Secretary General of the ANC. Both of them suggested that the ANC was in huge debate internally. Perhaps one of you arguing that you should pull out of the ICC and for good, as decided in 2017, and another saying no, we should stay in and argue internally and find other ways to deal with this, as decided in 2022, the 2022 conference. And therefore, the ANC is cut between the 2017 decision and the 2022 decision. And the big difference between the two decisions is that the first decision had decided to cut off, and therefore you don't have to deal with this matter again. They would not have had to deal with the team issue now. But the second one was a kind of a more nuanced one, which is about, no, you still need the ICC. You were very much part of the calls for the creation of the ICC. Yes, it might be conducting itself in ways that creates a lot of concern, but it worked within it to push for positive change and push for reforms, just as we do with all international organizations. And then these pole positions seem not to have been resolved by the fact that the conference decided not to withdraw or to withdraw the withdrawal. So now what was happening, it seems to me that there was a withdrawal of a withdrawal to withdraw, which itself was also withdrawn. When they said no, the decision, the idea that you will withdraw again was an incorrect decision. But that is a huge communication debacle for the ANC and for the country, by the way, because the president spoke in a state function and all that. But more than that, it is a huge strategy challenge for the ANC about how it strategizes, about how it deals with this very, very tricky matter. That the easiest way, as Umam Katini indicates, whatever have done would have been for both leaders who simply have said that this matter receives a lot of attention and that it's being processed right now and that we'll work on it up to the end. It was the simplest way to put it, just to signal to the world that you are looking at it, you are watching it, you're concerned about it, and then you will resolve how to deal with it over time. I think that was the best way to do that. But if you have overzealous leaders who are overzealous to show that they are in control or they are taking in charge of it, there's every danger that you will over-communicate or under-communicate or miscommunicate.
Amanda, do you agree with Professor Zondi?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask to step in there because as he's speaking, I'm getting energized to say no. So I think he's absolutely correct in that what this tells us is at a glance or bird's eye view, it gives you insight into what happened at that NEC. or how intensely debated the matter was. And so while he's speaking, I'm just reminded of some of what the sources were telling us about how the matter was raised. And Minister Naledi Pandor, although she's not an NEC member, was part of the people that presented that these are our options. This is where we are as the ANC. We really need to review whether we want to stay in the ICC or whether we need to leave. And so this matter was intensely debated. And what our sources told us was that there was no resolution on the matter. And so many of them were blaming Fikile Mbalula for misrepresenting the discussions that took place, saying, we didn't say that. We said, this is why we believe we should stay. This is the reason why we believe we should go. In between, what do we do? While we review this. And so when he talks about overzealous leadership and being seen to be in charge, I think that's exactly what happened. Maybe there was a slip of a tongue. I mean, in the newsroom, there was even a debate on whether did the SG understand what the rescinding of the withdrawal means. Do they understand what they're talking about? And so I do think there was also a slip of a tongue or overexcitement that led to the miscommunication, thus further confusing the nation and ultimately making a spectacle of South Africa on the international front.
Mm-hmm. Professor Zondi, if we put on the hat of government now, for lay people, the issue may seem to be, especially because of the noise that's going on, among the commentariat, the issue may look like a straightforward one of good versus bad. To say, for some people, for the West, Putin is the criminal, is the bad guy, and South Africa must just make a choice. Especially given our culture or our human rights, constitutionalism culture. Is it that simple that we just have to choose between good and bad?
It isn't. It isn't. No matter of geopolitics globally is ever a black and white issue or a moral or immoral issue. It's about choosing the good between the good and the bad guys. Quite often it's choosing between the bad and bad guys. They both bad, and then it's choosing the least morally conflicted position and choosing the least damaging position. It's never simple, and therefore when the leader of the Democratic Alliance says in this way, choosing whether we go with a democracy or with a non-democracy, he's oversimplifying it. Because if you look at the questions of Ukraine, both Ukraine and Russia, as it is with all of that particular part of the world, what we call Eurasia, there are democracies there that are sometimes dictatorial, but they are democracies, and sometimes autocratic, and sometimes fragile, sometimes dominated democracies and stuff like that. And both Ukraine and Russia have this similar picture. So choosing one is not choosing democracy, and then choosing another isn't choosing autocracy and stuff like that. So even in this particular case, whether you choose, say, for example, to let Putin come to South Africa and not prosecute, or you choose to arrest Putin. Either of those two choices are the most unenviable choices. They are difficult choices, which are flawed in many ways. So what has been the tradition in South Africa before, with al-Bashir, before his last visit, was to persuade, was the president directly to persuade al-Bashir and persuade other leaders of the AU that they would not, would encourage that President Bashir send somebody else to take his position and then manage the having to avoid this huge dilemma. So it seems to me in this particular case is to avoid the dilemma. That's the most important objective of the strategy, rather than a strategy which is to show moral rectitude, because it will lead you to arresting, or the decision to show a complete independence, which could lead you to ignoring the ICC warrant. I think the best position is the best goal to pursue the strategy is to avoid a dilemma.
Just coming back to you, Amanda, there is a talk that if South Africa were to arrest President Putin, it might lead to very serious international ramifications. You know, people have spoken about like a declaration of war, etc. And I'd like to ask you first, and then Professor Zondi, whether this is just idle talk, or would what sort of implications or complications would arise, and whether that actually the South African government would have the stomach to do such a thing.
Well, the Prof is talking. I'm just thinking about how I wonder if things would have been the same if we didn't have the Ukraine war. Because this comes at the back of us trying to explain ourselves to our friends and foes and partners around the world why we decided to take a neutral or non-aligned stance. All of that has, even before you bring the ICC matter into this dilemma, we are already in a position where we need to trying to, it's like a tough juggling act that we're trying to do now. And so it also comes at the back where we've sent an envoy to the US to try and, convince the US that, no, we're not condoning the war, but we're not going to condemn the war, but, we just want a peaceful resolution. At the same time, the ANC at its political level is busy canvassing Russia, trying to see how to please them. And so the ramification or it's, I don't know, he's right when he says it's like choosing between the bad and the bad. I just feel like or see that there's going to be serious economic backlash or like the story we wrote this week about why we're thinking of conducting the summit virtually, and why there was this law in the US that was being debated that although it won't be passed. I mean, things like that, the way maybe big powers can start to say, well, if you are pro-Russia or pro-Ukraine, we will pull, wheat, or we will pull fertilizer or whatever, or we will not hire South Africans. It's a very, very difficult thing that we're facing at the moment. And it really needs a president that needs to make a decision and stand by the decision and communicate the decision. And so in this whole saga, we find ourselves with a president who doesn't take decisions. And so now it's like the blind leading the blind. We are not sure what's happening because our president is like a people pleaser, and it's seen in the decisions and the way we are managing, trying to please everybody. And sometimes it's not the best for South Africa, but it's also not the right answer. But I'm just saying that they will definitely, I don't know if there will be a nuclear war. I don't think it will be that. I don't think Putin will take it that far where he presses the button. But the ramifications are very serious. They are extremely serious for Africa. They're extremely serious for how South Africa is perceived internationally or globally. South Africa's voice at places like the G7, the G20. So yeah, it's very serious. The ramifications are incredibly serious.
Prof Zondi, we reported, in part, or rather, let me say, Amanda reported over the weekend in the paper that the government is toying with the idea of hosting President Putin virtually. Do you see in the greater scheme of things globally, do you see him possibly agreeing to not come when the other presidents are present?
Yes, definitely the possibility of converting the entire summit into a virtual summit, nobody comes, would be an attractive option to look at. Just as the idea of moving the summit, of swapping our spaces with the next party. The next party for us is Brazil, and then after that it's Russia. We can always swap those spaces in the sequence of summits and say take the summits to Russia, or take the summits to India, or take the summit to China, who are never going to arrest, and there won't be any pressure on them to arrest. That's another option that could be there, which is simply to shift around the spaces, simply understanding and empathizing with South Africa's dilemma in the fact that it has domesticated the Rome Statute establishing the ICC, unlike a few other countries. So it has demonstrated it very blindly, in the sense that it has not made any provision for it to maneuver or any exceptions or any. It's simply just domesticated as it is. So there is that possibility, and it seems to me the going virtual is the most attractive one. The last two summits of the Brics were anyway online, so they could have an online one, definitely. It would send a positive signal for South Africa in terms of strategy, because again, if the goal was to avert a crisis and a dilemma, an enigma, it would be the best option. So all options you exercise depend on what your goal is. If your goal is to avoid a dilemma, then you would have to change the form of a summit in order to avoid having Putin land in South Africa and then have to act on it or not act on it.
Well, what I'm puzzled about, Prof, and you've just touched on it briefly. Other countries which are signatories have what one may call an exit clause that you've just referred to now on arresting sitting heads of state, etc. You know, why did we not include that? Is it naivety or carelessness or what? There would have been a precedent of, with other countries doing that.
We'd have to speculate about why it is that we did that. Yeah, but I do think that one of the definite reasons is naivety and being ignorant about the situation and not calculating. If you notice that the countries that calculated this were countries that been old in this geopolitical game, and they could read through this, and they could read to it that you're creating a structure that has an ability to undermine your immunity laws. So if you haven't that, and you are signing up to it, you have two options. Either you don't sign up to it, you demonstrate your extreme independence like the United States did, or you sign up to it but make provisions for yourself to protect yourself, like Britain did and other countries did, in order to signal that they are committed to this morally high position, to this correct position, and but you don't want to inherit with it the dilemmas that come with it.
Hey, Amanda, let me ask you this just quickly, before we get to the end of our conversation. The person who seems to have been missing in action during this week is the Minister of Foreign Relations, Naledi Pandor. Where does that leave her? The entire episode of this last week. How does she go to the UN and say, I'm speaking for South Africa? Or when other diplomats call her and say, well, what's going on in your country? What does she say? Would she still be believable?
I don't think so, especially since it's the head of state that went ahead and said these things. It's very difficult, even as they were trying to do a PR or crisis management last week, we were just discussing but it was the president that said that. Why then do you send the spokesperson to say that, to correct everything? I think she's in a very difficult position, and knowing the character that she is, she's not one to mince her words. She's not one to mislead, or if she believes in something, she says it like it is. And so I also wonder, as she sits there watching all of this unfolding, what she's thinking, especially since she made the presentation in the NEC, or was one of the people, as well as she's also not part of the envoys that are sent out there. It does make you question whether she's not trusted to communicate maybe his vision or the message, although she holds that position, that very powerful position of being South Africa's chief ambassador, if I can put it like that, globally. I'm not sure. Hey, it's a very difficult one, Bramai, to answer. You look at things like how on Friday the government comes out at the back of the crisis, the communication blunder, saying we've established an interministerial committee which will be headed by the deputy president. Again, you are shifting responsibility or the matter. Now we must move, or our focus must move away from what the president said and what the ANC said, who are the people who are the chief spokespersons or people on the matter. You are now shifting the matter to somebody else to manage or communicate. We'll see how Paul Mashatile manages this saga. What we do know is that the Interministerial Committee is going to be meeting next week. We know that the ANC Subcommittee on International Relations is going to be finalizing its documents and all the work that they've been doing behind the scenes to the IMC, so that the ANC, together with the government, have like some streamlined decision on the matter. Where the minister is in all of this, I cannot tell you 100%.
Prof, there's with so many fingers in the pie on this issue. There are interministerial things. There's the deputy president now. There's the president. There's Fikile Mbalula at the ANC and all of that. How does this leave the foreign minister looking?
The foreign minister has a very specific role to communicate what the president wants. And the foreign minister is the closest minister to the president, and would, in the end, be advising everybody about the way to do. They will take a cue from her. That is guaranteed. The ANC NEC took the cue from her, and then they had to decide. Of course, it's much more open. But in the other structures, like Interministerial Committee, if she lays out and says these are the options we have, the International Committee would most likely follow the line. You know, in government affairs generally, in the science of government, when the decisions are clear and you know where you stand on a thing, you take a decision, whoever is responsible is entailed. But when you still need to test waters, or when you are not sure what to do, you give it to a committee or a commission. So committees and commissions are a tool to allow you extended time to process a thing in your mind before you decide on it. So it's kind of like a longer process of decision making. It's still decision making. It's not indecision. It's a longer process of decision making where it is not very clear in your mind how you want to proceed. And you should remember that the president is not even a foreign policy person. He's not even a global politics person, pretty much an economy and domestic affairs person. And you could understand why he would like to ask the deputy president to chair that committee that must decide on this matter. But the ANC had already decided on the matter, and I guess the decision to be made by the ministerial committee is how are we going to process the decisions of the NEC, which is not to withdraw, but rather to look into the domestication of the Rome Statute, and then to decide specifically how do we then avert the ICC warrant dilemma, because the ANC seem not to have decided specifically on that matter, but left it to government to decide how are they going to avert the dilemma.
And just lastly from your side, Prof, because the context in which we're discussing this is broadly our foreign policy. Has it lost its way, or is this how foreign policy goes, that it gets confused sometimes and us lesser mortals don't always understand the machinations?
Foreign policy by design is the trickiest area of public policy. Unlike many areas of public policy, this is the one where the dynamics today are never the same tomorrow. And therefore you have to think on your feet. And second, it's one area of public policy that is the most intellectually demanding, because you have to think through things. You can't just decide. You have to think about, if I take this route, how will others react? How will it affect? For example, if South Africa decides, for example, to push Putin not to come, how will this affect the relationship between the two and the trade between the two? Or how would it affect South Africa in relation to the Russian influence? If it decides not to, and it decides not to arrest Putin in South Africa, how would that affect the relationship with the EU? How would that affect the relationship with the US, and so on? And how does it mop up the implications of that? With every decision, we must think about the second, third layer of implications for every decision, because every decision triggers a chain of reactions that we must understand. So it's an area of foreign policy that really needs thinkers. The thinking part of public service is what is needed in foreign policy.
And you would say, as things stand now, you're confident that we've got this thing, we're on top of matters?
Challenges we face tells us that we have a lot of work to do in that area. We have to up the game, we have to improve this. And I can suspect that also because the president does not have an international relations advisor since December, these things are coming at a time when his think tank on foreign policy is not there. Has to lean a lot more on the minister, who also leans on the think tank around her, which is 4 DGs and a DG who's a foreign policy expert. So she has to lean on those. And then at the ANC level, I have to lean on the subcommittee made up of a mixture of people, some of them without foreign policy expertise. So it's a lot of work that needs to be done. And you really do need the strong thinking capacity around foreign policy within government generally. The National Development Plan in Chapter 7 did indicate that South Africa needs to improve this a lot. This capacity, including the capacity to strategize, was the thinking capacity.
And lastly, Amanda, just to go back to you to close for us, there's this talk of reviewing our engagement with the ICC protocols. The domestication, to say maybe there needs to be a change, maybe change the law or something. What sort of agency do you think that we will be able to resolve all of these things before August?
When I spoke to the deputy chair, Obed Papela, the subcommittee deputy, the ANC, not the government, he says, because I said, what if you are not able to domesticate the law, or the parliamentary process that's needed to take place takes longer than the time that you need, because August is around the corner. And he said to me, there are other options, but he wasn't able to tell me what these other options are. And so when I think about that together with the legal opinion that DIRCO has received, that we have no other option but to arrest Putin because of the precedent that was set by al-Bashir. I'm not sure. Hey, I'm really not sure. But we had this discussion in the office this morning, and I think if there's political will, one thing I know about South Africa, if there is political will to do something, we can use our majority in parliament. We can do it. It's just at the moment there's legal opinions being sought by government. There's legal opinions. There's a lot at play, and I'm just hoping that whatever we do will be legally sound. And like the Prof said, is that you can make a decision today, but it will affect us 50 years later. So I just hope that whatever we do, all I know is that the government is trying to avoid a situation where South Africa is a spectacle like we were. And we don't want a situation where organizations or political parties take us to court again. We don't even want a situation where it's about Brics, but all that's overshadowing all the meetings or the summit itself is questions about Putin. I think they're going to try all that they can to avoid a situation where all eyes are on something else instead of South Africa chairing this summit.
Okay. With my guests, that's all the time we have on the Sunday Times Politics Weekly for this week's episode. And I'd like to thank them very much. Professor Sphamandla Zondi, who teaches politics and international relations at the University of Johannesburg, as well as Amanda Khoza, who is the Sunday Times presidential correspondent. We appreciate your time. I'm Mike Siluma. Until next time, do stay safe, stay blessed, and let's do good for our country.